countries are not poor, they are only overexploited. This cannot be more accurate than in case of previous British colonies, particularly India, Pakistan and Bangladesh, which were then not separate countries and were collectively called Indian Subcontinent. Britain started its trade-cladded colonization as early as 16th century. On the 31st of December 1600, Queen Elizabeth I chartered East India Company. It comprised of traders from London who were interested to trade for spices from Indian Subcontinent, which was then ruled by Mughal Empire. It is essential to remember here that according to the British historian and economist Angus Maddison, in 1600, when East India Company was chartered, Britain's total share in global GDP was merely 2%, while Indian Subcontinent was the third largest economy of the world with 23% share in global GDP, which was greater than the whole Europe's global GDP share combined. By 1700s, Mughal Empire was losing its grip over Indian Subcontinent due to a host of internal and external factors, including invasions from Persia and Afghanistan. East India Company was quick to seize the moment, and from a trading company became an occupying force with its own navy and army. As central Mughal authority waned, the region disintegrated into small pockets, held by local princes and nawabs. British Company defeated some, and bribed others and consolidated its shackles across the subcontinent. Dually supported and sponsored by British Empire, the company started exploitation of Indian subcontinent resources to extreme level, massively depriving local population not only of economic sustenance, but also of human dignity. British Raj systematically destroyed Indian industry. Subcontinent had a thriving textile sector which accounted for 25% of the world textile exports. It was famous product in Turkey, China, Egypt and Persia, which were the leading empires and civilization centers at the time. When British consolidated their control over the subcontinent, they imposed 70 to 80% tariff on Indian textile in England, while there was no tariff imposed on British textile in India, thus rendering Indian textile sector unable to compete. Raw material for textile like cotton was extracted from subcontinent, and was sent back to England, where textile industry would prepare the final product to be sold in Indian market, on higher prices. William Harrison Morland, a British civil officer in India, noted in his 1920 book, India at the Death of Akbar, "It is still to my mind, indisputable that in the matter of industry India was more advanced relatively to Western Europe than she is today." Before the British arrival of East India Company, there was a promising shipbuilding industry in the Malabar ports of Bengal, Masulipatam, Surat, and Calicut, and Indian ships sailed to the Arabian Sea and the Bay of Bengal. In the early 17th century, the Bengal fleet consisted of 4,000 to 5,000 ships, each with the capacity of 400 to 500 tons. After 1757, to reduce competition, East India Company developed monopoly on the trade routes, which were previously used by Indian merchants. Duty was imposed on ships of Indian merchants not only on foreign trips, but also on Indian ports and routes to Indian ports. Shipbuilding business based in Britain could not compete easily, so they called on Parliament to ban Indian shipbuilding. The first act came in 1813, in which Indian ships below the 350 tons were prohibited to travel from Indian colonies to British. These practices led to systematic destruction of shipbuilding industry in Indian subcontinent. Exploitation of resources reached to the limit that once the third largest economy of the world, started to suffer from mass starvation. In 1943, 4 million Bengalis starved to death as the food from India was being funneled to British armies fighting the Second World War. When Winston Churchill, England's Prime Minister, was informed about the famine, he replied, "Famine was their own fault, for breeding like rabbits." Today's British often remind masses of erstwhile Indian subcontinent, the contributions of British Raj including massive railway infrastructure and education system. Let us look at them one by one. Between 1853 and 1924, an extensive railways network was laid in India. It was, however, not to increase connectivity for local population, rather was laid to extract and transport industrial raw material from all over the subcontinent to the ports for further shipment to Britain.
The whole network was established with Indian money, and to make further profits and benefit British industry, over 14,000 locomotives were imported to India from Britain between 1854 and 1947. For education, according to an American historian who visited India in 1930, total budget of British Raj for education system in Indian subcontinent was less than half the budget of high schools in New York State. By the time British left Indian subcontinent in 1947, the literacy rate was only 17%. British officers posted in Indian subcontinent were paid generous salaries, and after their retirement, they enjoyed extensive perks including heavy pensions again from subcontinent's treasury. The detailed calculations of William Digby, the British writer, shows that in 1901, the salary of the Secretary of State for Indian subcontinent was equivalent to the average annual income of 90,000 Indians. British Raj imposed massive taxes on local population. As described by the Earl of Chatham as the redemption of a nation, a kind of gift from heaven. Almost $18 million were transferred from India to British each year during 1765 to 1815 alone. Whole rise and industrialization of Britain was financed through looting and depredation of regions like Indian subcontinent. This extensive exploitation left Indian subcontinent in extreme poverty, whose economy grew only 0.001% from 1900 to 1947. In 1947, while Britain left Indian subcontinent, 90% of the population was below poverty line.